What if the biggest leadership problem today isn't strategy? It's that we've been optimizing. What if that's the wrong system? Welcome to the Leadership Equation. I'm Roger Francis. Every organization runs on two operating systems: the capital system that measures results and the human system that creates those results. Every week, we'll be challenging conventional leadership, thinking and showing how you can integrate IQ and EQ. And that's the key to closing the gap between intelligence and impact, because the future of leadership is human. And you want to stay tuned for this episode because I got a special guest with me today. I want everybody to welcome David Beamish. David is a counselor and a therapist with over 30 plus years of experience. And I thought, David, if it's okay with you, what we would do is we would start our first episode with the human system, because I think everyone understands and is pretty comfortable with the capital system, especially as you think about sizes of organizations and organizations alike. Does that sound good, David? Can we start there?
Sounds like a good idea, Roger.
But you know what? Actually, let me start off with something. You know, I like jokes.
Okay.
I like to start things off with a bit of a joke.
We'll find out.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm a pharmacist.
I did not know that.
You didn't know that?
You never told me.
Oh, yeah. I'm a licensed pharmacist.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I'm a licensed pharmacist. You're a licensed therapist.
Yes.
So what do you get when you get a pharmacist and a therapist in a room?
I'm scared to say it out loud.
You get pharmacotherapeutics.
You thought of that all by yourself, didn't you?
I did. And you know what? I'm actually proud of that one. David, bad jokes aside, okay, welcome to the episode, and thank you very much for being here. What we're going to be talking about is a very interesting concept around leadership and around the two different systems. The capital system, we've been optimizing strategy, we've been refining processes, we've been investing in technologies evolving at a rapid pace. On top of that, we got organizations and leaderships across organizations that are asking the question, with everything that we've done, strategy's right, it's sound, it could be regurgitated, with the processes enhanced, efficiencies improved, with the investment we're making in technology and in AI. Why are we still not reaching our full potential? And why haven't we been able to blow up this P&L and reach a differentiated level from our competition? And that's why I think the human system is a really important system to talk through. So welcome you to the conversation. Thank you very much for adding your expertise to this conversation and the much needed dialogue here. So let's get started. So David, you've sat across people for 30 plus years.
That's true.
Okay, 30 plus years. And you've sat with people for 30 plus years during hard moments in their lives.
Right.
It's not like it's lollipops and bubble gums. You've seen the stresses of life across different industries, different backgrounds as well. What have you learned about people that you think every leader should know or could take away from those 30 years that you've had?
I think one of the first things that comes to mind, Roger, is that at the core, people want to succeed in their lives. You know, if you think of an example of a parent reacting to their own child who gets a D or an F, and they're upset because their goals for their child's interrupted, they don't stop to think that probably the person who's most upset is the kid who got the F. So I think individuals are always going to perform at a higher level if they understand clearly what's expected of them, if they feel empowered, if they are respected, and if they feel appreciated. And I don't know that there's going to be any substitute for those things, regardless of technology and what other tools are available for us. I thought about how to sort of present the basic idea of this, but if people feel a sense of purpose and appreciation, and then you add the vision that they can buy into, then that's going to result in a very high commitment to whatever they're pursuing. It's important that people feel recognized, that we don't just lay out the expectations of what we need them to do, but we reference the appreciation for what they've accomplished all along the process, not just at the end result. And finally, positive reinforcement is always going to be much more productive than confrontation, I think.
And we'd sit back and we're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And for your expertise over 30 years to point that out right out of the get-go, it just leads me to think through, if that's common sense in nature, then why is it still that we're talking about it? It's not necessarily easy to put it into practice. Is the system, and when I say system, is the way we go to market, or is it the way that we practice something that we need to be aware of? Whether you're talking about a family unit or a business unit, bringing into this is the leadership equation around IQ and EQ.
Yes.
Right? IQ is where the strategy sits. IQ is where the results sit. IQ is where the processes sit. But what you're emphasizing is the EQ component of the strategy. Why do you think it's still difficult to be able to create that environment?
I mean, at the core, I don't think it's what people are trained to do. So the expectations are not laid out. You know, some of the highest regarded people in our society are highly trained medical physicians. And it seems like the more trained they are, the more expertise they have, but sometimes the less, we call it, bedside manner.
Yeah.
And you can't blanket all physicians. I'm fortunate I have an amazing personal physician and I feel like I have a great relationship with. But I remember years ago when I had to have a surgical procedure on my knee, and I went to my primary care physician after she'd sent me to a very good surgeon. And I said, I just wish I had the feeling that he cared about it. And she said, well, do you want a really good surgeon or do you want someone who you feel is going to make you feel good? And I said, I want both. And her comment to me is, well, good luck with that. Now, I think that's kind of outrageous to say that applies to all surgeons, but there is a little bit of a stereotype that the core training that is associated with colleges and advanced practices in all areas doesn't really focus on that as a standalone area of how people are impacted by what we're doing.
That's an interesting comment that you just made, because I think coming from, myself, 25 plus years across executive leadership, okay, for several different industries or different companies, I think at times we view it as an or equation, IQ or EQ, and not necessarily as an and. So when you brought that analogy in around the physician, around, intelligent, but the bedside manner, that EQ component may not be there. Do you see the IQ, EQ equation differently as you've worked with your groups, your patients? Do you see it optimized in any certain industry, or do you see it as an opportunity across the board?
I've come to realize and believe for myself that intelligence and wisdom are two very different things. I have encountered people that have amazing levels of intelligence, but they don't demonstrate good wisdom. And we also see a lot of people that they have phenomenal success in one area of their life, perhaps their profession, but they don't translate into having good success as a parent, or they don't have good success necessarily in their marriages or their interpersonal relationships. So they've got very high IQ, which is trained and measured and validated all through formal education, but these other areas are never challenged as much. And we really don't train people or necessarily create the expectation for the standards that people can achieve. So I think their wisdom is not as evident in these areas, even though they've got that capacity.
As you think through, and I agree with you, because sitting at the boardrooms, I've had the pleasure of sitting at boardroom tables. I've had the pleasure of sitting on executive leadership teams where if you were to take a look at the executive leadership team on paper, you'd be like, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Like just their credentials alone would speak magnitudes to their level of IQ. Some of the smartest people that I've been able to work with and had the pleasure of working with. Yet, as you think about moving that strategy from the boardroom to the break room, it seems to break down at times.
Yep.
One of the interesting things that I've always wondered is the following. there are times where you could have a turnaround situation. There are times in business where you're not performing the way you need to perform. Heck, there are times in life, in the family, that you're not performing the way you need to be performing. And that brings pressure on you. I've said oftentimes that as you go through life, you're going to have moments in time where your family is not balanced.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to have points in time where your work's not balanced.
Yep.
Okay. Try not to have them both unbalanced at the same time.
Right.
Okay. But I'm interested in your perspective of stress, how stress impacts that leadership equation. Where do you see it impact? How do you see it impact?
Yeah. I mean, I think stress is huge, and there's some differences even in the research that talks about more short-term stress versus more long embedded stress, because there are people that are operating with not just acute periods of stress, but just sustained chronic stress, and it becomes what they feel is normal. But when you end up thinking about people in leadership, EQ, I think, becomes undermined first. That leaders will tend to interrupt people in a crisis, or if they're in stress, while they may dismiss ideas too quickly. They become controlling or judgmental, or they even stop listening. So people don't feel validated. They don't feel like they're being included. They just feel like they're being judged. And someone who's not under stress probably is not going to behave that way. But, over a longer period of time, if someone's operating under stress, they'll tend to miss really important information. They will make poor strategic decisions. They're going to forget key details or oversimplify really complex ideas. It's because stress just can't be limited only to how people are functioning in their profession. It does spill over into how they're functioning in all areas of their life, which includes nutrition, how much sleep they're getting, are they getting enough activity? So it ends up being just a cascading effect of the more unbalanced we are and the longer we stay, the more unbalanced we stay.
If this audience is a group of leaders, intended for leaders, how would you advise leaders? What are the signs or symptoms that they would see across their team that would tell them that the environment in which they're operating isn't one that's conducive for personal growth or business outcomes?
One of the most essential things for any leader to have the most effective outcomes starts with self-awareness, with their own capacity to evaluate their approach. And are they bringing the right energy? I mean, there's this really important distinction we need to make in human communication is how do we talk to somebody in a way that they can hear?
Yes.
We may give someone very good information. It's factually correct. It's irrefutable. But if we say it in a way that isn't going to be how they'll best hear that, so is that the responsibility of the person who's listening, or is that the responsibility of the communicator? So I think there's a lot of wisdom to be gained from leaders looking and then also evaluating what they're seeing from the people that report to them. Are they reporting that they are fatigued? Are they seem stretched? I think there's a real sense of ownership that people will demonstrate when they've bought into the bigger mission. I know you've written a book, and I read it obviously before we met today, and I think one of the standout examples from your book was talking about when President Kennedy was at the Space Center where they were planning for the first mission to the moon, and he was just walking down the hall and saw an employee and stopped him and asked him what his job was, and he was the janitor. And he said that I'm working on getting the first man to the moon. So that just conveys his sense of buy-in. This person's not the janitor while other people are doing the work of getting someone to the moon. He's contributing to how someone's going to get to the moon in his role. So when you have that level of situational awareness and you're paying attention at that level of detail of the organization, it seems it sets you up to have much more chance to succeed.
Yeah, you'd say the organization is fully aligned at that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, listen, I've been in situations too where the younger version of me was giving feedback to make me feel better.
Mm-hmm.
It was getting it off my chest.
Right.
And frankly, I didn't care on how it was received because it was the intent of that feedback early on was to get it off my chest,
Right.
not recognizing how that feedback landed. Now, you know, I have 2 boys.
Yep.
Okay. So Pierce and Preston, you know, being a father really has helped me with situational leadership. But I think about the way I deliver feedback is not about getting it off my chest. It's about making sure it's heard
Yep.
so that it could be actioned appropriately by the individual receiving the feedback.
Yep.
And also knowing that there's an urgency to the feedback I'm giving, but there's also a behavior change that I need to see from that individual.
One of the misconceptions from a lot of leaders is that the idea of paying attention to, EQ means that you've got to be soft, or
Yeah.
you've got to be indirect, or you can't be straight. And really, it's more about, it's important to be kind, but you can be strong. Leaders that are implementing EQ and IQ, they're very effective because they are powerful in the way they lead.
Yeah.
They are able to be assertive, and they're able to be direct and to create expectations for people without fear or favor. But they do it in a way that's respectful, and they do it in a way that they're also listening. So that's the other point I'd like to make, Roger, is that do leaders demonstrate that they're willing to listen as much as they expect people in their organization to listen to them?
Yeah, I think that's a great point around the biggest misconception around EQ. EQ is not, to your point, about being soft.
Right.
It's about being candid.
Yes.
It's about being candid and delivering that candid feedback in a way that the individual knows why you're giving it
Yes.
and how it makes them feel, but also deliver. I've been on both sides, right? I shared with you the point in time earlier in my career where, the feedback was about getting it off my chest. But I've also been in the situation where I didn't feel necessarily safe in certain situations.
Mm-hmm.
But my reaction, and you said it earlier, my reaction to that, I wasn't self-aware. I became very defensive. And when I become very defensive, I tend to retreat
Yep.
and pull back.
For sure.
And that's where organizations or individuals could feel that being a sense of a lack of engagement at times,
Right.
when really all I was trying to do is think about survival a bit.
Yes.
It's like, hey, what do I need to do? How do I get back on this?
Yeah.
I needed to go inside, become introspective to come out. What do you make of that? As leaders, how do we become more self-aware, whether you're the leader giving the feedback or the leader hearing the feedback, and recognizing the emotional coefficient to it?
First of all, I think the way I view it is that leadership is always a privilege. And for people in leadership to recognize the value of their humility in being an effective leader, it will make a difference in the way they treat people, in the way they respond to people, and the way they lead people. So the more our society progresses, the organizations will always have hierarchy. It's very anchored to the way structures function, and there needs to be hierarchy for any organization, including a family, to have the best result. But within that hierarchy, there can still be mutual respect, and there can be the demonstration. And people that are in leadership, I think, have a higher responsibility to demonstrate that because they are setting the tone. And it's very difficult to demand from people a standard that you're not giving an example to people for. So hypocrisy is not tolerated very well these days, I think. And the other part of it is that the idea is we want to win, but at the price of someone else losing.
Mm.
And I think it's just the opposite of anything that's going to result in the most efficient growth for any organization and ultimately, I think, for the country.
That's an interesting comment that you just made in terms of winning at the cost of someone losing.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in organizations, especially around leaders, where every organization is trying to guard against silos.
Yeah.
Trying to guard against silos. I firmly believe that when you have an organization that is competing for each other versus against each other, then you create a differentiating organization, a differentiating culture.
Yeah.
that
Roger,
allows
can
you to
can I say I've talked to some pretty senior leadership in one of the bigger companies in Atlanta here, and this could be any company, but it's just the one I'm aware of. And the higher levels of leadership, could only be described as toxic. It's just cutthroat, and there's an environment of fear and of measuring accountability by wins and losses, and there's no transparency among the leaders in that organization. So what they present as their expectation for the organization is not matched at all by how they function among each other at the higher level of the organization. And it's very transparent to anyone who's paying attention.
So how do you advise on that? Because we know that misalignment, okay, that unhealthy tension is going to trickle down in the organization.
Of course.
Everyone sees it.
Of course.
Okay, I've been there. But how do you advise against that so that if anyone here is a leader that aspires to get to that level, or is that level?
I don't think it needs to be, because I think there are examples where people are amazingly successful and they don't operate that way. But part of that, again, is, are leaders in a position where they're first willing to listen? I mean, we get this idea, most people would know what reflective listening is. That idea, I'm going to tell you something, and you say, all right, what I hear you saying is, and it's kind of a summary back. And I think for a lot of people, they think that's the crown jewel of effective communication. But I think there's two levels that are above that. And this is rooted in actually, a psychological theory that's being developed. And one of those is validation. So the idea of communicating and validating what someone's saying doesn't mean you necessarily agree with them, but it is conveying you have a sense of how important that point is or how important it is to that person. But then there's even another level beyond that, and that is empathy. And empathy also doesn't mean we have to agree, but empathy is a caring for the person above and beyond whatever that issue is. And this just doesn't apply to organizations. This applies to any human dealing in any organization, including their families and in their marriages, in their relationships, in parenting, or with friend groups as well.
IQ or EQ?
Well, really, it's got components of both, but at the core of it is EQ.
Yeah.
Right? It's self-awareness. It's the ability to listen at the level that you want others to listen to you. It's anchored in humility, but that doesn't mean you're sacrificing a focus on what it needs to be accomplished in the time frame that it needs to be accomplished. I think a lot of leaders could recognize that ultimately, if they get buy-in, people will do more to accomplish the overall goal of the organization if there's alignment than if they don't pay attention to that because they don't think it's important. Roger, I'd like to give one other example. I met, this probably goes back 10 years ago, I met with a senior level executive, one of the biggest companies really in the United States, I think, but certainly they're anchored in Atlanta here. And this was a immensely talented person who had exquisite training and was just smart, is the only way you could say it. And I remember I was meeting them primarily because their success in their corporate life was not at all being matched in their marriage and as a parent, and their spouse was planning to leave them or was thinking about, whether the marriage would continue. But I remember this person complaining about how inefficient it felt and how they were sick of their assistant, like wanting to talk to them about something that was personal. And they just thought it was a colossal waste of time. It was more of the idea of just do your damn job. Stop bugging me. So I really sort of challenged them one day and I said, I want you to try an experiment. I don't care if you think there's value or not. Just try as an experiment. Would you take 5 minutes at the most on any given Monday and take a moment with your assistant? On a Monday.
You know how busy Mondays are?
After a weekend. And ask them, how's your family? Just simply ask an interpersonal question about their family or how was their weekend. And they just rolled their eyes. They thought it was the stupidest thing they'd ever heard. And I didn't see them for a month. And they came back and they said, oh, I'm not going to lie, I've totally been surprised. this person went from someone who I just felt constantly annoyed to someone who's now solving problems that I didn't even know I was going to have. And that person's buy-in, their assistant's buy-in and their loyalty just went to the next level. And just they needed some type of interpersonal connection, some sort of validation, some sort of exposure to that person beyond the projects. And once they felt that, there was no stopping them.
He continued on with it, I'm assuming.
During the time I knew him, he did. Unfortunately, this person's marriage didn't continue, and they weren't able to win the confidence back of their partner. But I'd say professionally, they realized that, much of what's talked about applied to their professional life as well as their relationships.
I'm going to bring in a different variable into leadership. For the first time, okay, we have 5 different generations in the workplace.
Yeah.
You have the baby boomers.
Yeah.
You have the Gen X's. You have the millennials. You have the Gen Z's. You have these different generations that are entering in, and they all come up from different backgrounds, different experiences, and they have different needs.
Yes.
My father, okay, he was absolutely a baby boomer.
Yep.
Okay. So as you think about that piece, working in the baby boomer age, when your boss said something, your boss had the IQ.
That's right.
You didn't ask why.
That's right.
I grew up in a Lebanese household.
That's right.
The one question we never asked our dad is why.
Yeah.
If my dad tried to lead a millennial today, okay, it wouldn't go well.
Yeah, that's right.
So as we think about leadership, okay, how should leaders think, and or what insights can you give leaders around the different generations that they're going to be leading in some of their needs, especially as we think about IQ and EQ?
I think it's one of the real significant challenges in the workplace, actually, because if you think of the younger generations, but not certainly all the way to the boomers, their access to technology and the way they access information, it's just, through technology, is just native to them. They've never known life without an iPad or without Wi-Fi, where there's instant access to any information that they need. Whereas it's really learned behavior. It's not native to any of the older folks that are in leadership. And not always, but obviously as careers build, there tend to be older people that tend to be in senior leadership in some organizations. So is there a willingness for them to recognize that this entire younger generation, they think differently. They don't represent hierarchy in the same way. They don't respect it in the same traditional way as the model that you're describing that your father operated in. So again, it really comes down to this core principle of how do you talk to a group of people or an age of people in a way that they will best hear. So the question is, does a leader operate by saying, these are my demands I expect you to meet, and I really don't care how you feel about it? Or does a leader say, to truly be a transformational leader over time, I need to be constantly in a state of evolving. I need to be constantly understanding my organization, the groups of people that are coming out of college with the skill sets and their training, how they access information, what's socially important to them, and what the expectations for their lives are, because it's quite different than the older generation.
The notes that I've taken in preparation for this, I looked at the baby boomers, the Gen X's, the Gen Y's, the millennials, and they all have a different need.
Yep.
They all have a different need.
Yes.
As I think about what I am, and I'm a Gen X, okay, I'm a Gen X. What's important to me is flexibility and autonomy.
Yep.
The opportunity to grow is important to me, and results matter to me.
Yep.
So those are the ones. But it's also give me freedom and I will deliver.
Yep.
But to the baby boomer, that may be
frightening.
It's frightening.
That's right.
It's like, I'm not going to give you freedom.
That's right.
Until you earn it.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's right.
So you could see how just with that, it could create stress or tension.
Yes.
Just with me as an example.
Yeah.
And so as I think about from a leadership perspective, if you, and to your point earlier, we are given the privilege to lead.
Yeah.
So we have to take that privilege and really do the best we can with it. But that requires us to lean in and understanding the teams and what the teams need below us.
I think one of the real challenges too, some of the younger generation, they may not be entirely realistic about where they expect to be in a given amount of time. They want and expect their first job to be six figures, and they don't see any reason why it shouldn't be. Whereas, that may represent an upper income for someone who's a boomer that spent their entire life before they ended up seeing a six-figure income.
Yeah.
So just kind of those expectations of the younger generation may not always be realistic to the organization as well. So it's important that there become an understanding of that, because I think the younger generation, they want to succeed also. They're motivated, they're hungry for success, but they don't want to feel that they're just constantly running into opposition, obstacles, or they don't understand why things are being asked of them in a way that doesn't make sense or doesn't feel efficient.
You brought this topic up, so I'm going to just pull on it a little bit. I made notes to pull on it. Technology, okay, and AI. How do you see it impacting the leadership equation of IQ and EQ? Where is it supporting the most? And would you say that the technology in the AI world that we live in is heavily skewed to IQ or EQ, I guess is my question.
I think it's skewed to IQ when I just think of it. I haven't been asked that question in that way because there's a large amount of data that's able to be produced by just asking for it. I think we don't really know how to measure yet. There's probably a few people in the country and the world that are truly visionary and see how things will unfold and have a sense of what's possible in what amount of time. But, when I think of someone who is an analyst that I meet with regularly for a big company in Atlanta, and, they're feeling quite demoralized at the moment as they've been looking for their career to build. They're in their early 40s and they've had progressive success in their career. And essentially they've been told that really ChatGPT and the other technologies are really going to be doing the analyzing and they're just going to be doing the checking, the proofreading. So at the moment, the way it's been introduced to them has not empowered them to see how they're going to have enhanced value. It's kind of like, well, I guess I'm glad I still have a job. But their commitment to the mission of the organization is probably less at the moment, but it really hasn't been explained and it's really not being implemented. So just the introduction of the idea of how AI is going to be used is really important for organizations and employees to have an understanding of how that's going to impact them and how are they still going to feel valued.
And I think it's important to recognize that organizations are still trying to figure it out.
That's true.
Okay,
That's
so
true.
you have a workforce trying to figure it out and organizations trying to figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's more that we don't know than we do know, quite frankly.
I agree with the assessment of where you think it's heavily leans. But coming back to the point, I think that AI in today's world and what we have today is leaning towards more IQ.
Yeah.
Information's there.
Yeah.
It's accessible and it's easily digestible.
Yeah.
It digests it for you.
Yeah.
Now you have to be careful because the information is only as good as the input you put into it.
That's right.
And I still think it needs human interpretation.
Yes.
With things, because in an AI world, there's going to be things that are going to be AI-led, human-supported, and there's going to be things that are human-supported, AI-led. But as you think through it, the way I see AI being used is more around the IQ piece, which is why I believe that one of the largest variables in the equation is that human system EQ piece. I don't think AI is going to build trust. No. I don't think AI is going to listen, actively may actively listen and you don't want it to, but I don't think that it's going to be able to rally the human capital of an organization behind it to give the discretionary effort, I should say.
This is just an example that applies just to my clinical practice as opposed to a larger organization. But I've had 3 clients that ultimately said, I'm going to discontinue the frequency of visits because I'm going to access AI as a source of solving problems and gaining information about things that they were addressing in therapy. All 3 of them came back and ultimately said They weren't sure how much to trust the information, but ultimately, even information they felt was good, they didn't necessarily know how to apply it.
Yes.
Because there was a process that's involved from a person talking to a person and the interpersonal connection that is not replicated at this point by the AI technology. Now, I'm not sure where it's going to go, but at the moment, I don't think that's the case.
But that really even speaks to disruption is a constant in leadership.
Yes.
And we all need to be mindful of that and stay attuned to that so that we could continually change. The only person you have control over changing.
Yes.
And that's yourself.
That's
and
right.
you've taught me that.
That's right. I think that's true.
See?
I think that's very true.
See, our sessions together are working.
How do about that?
All right. Let's go into a lightning round. Couple questions. Let's fire through some of them. Most overrated leadership trait.
Information.
What do you mean? I wasn't expecting that.
I think that if I know more than you, that you'll automatically defer to me as a leader. If someone's more trained and they've got more degrees or more experience, that doesn't automatically gain them credibility with people that they're dealing with. So I think leaders have to constantly be thinking not about right and wrong, good and bad, but what's more effective or less effective. And so how do you constantly paint the vision of what you're trying to accomplish in a way that the people in the downstream of the organization will have clarity? And it's not just about information that they have that you don't. It's about, do people feel cared for? Do they feel concerned from the organization? Do they feel that they matter? So, there's a study some years ago that was trying to qualitatively evaluate what determines whether or not people stay in a marital partnership for a lifetime versus the number of marriages that don't. And ultimately, they determined this general equation that there were 5 or 6 positive interactions between the couples that lasted a lifetime versus the negative interactions where that wasn't the case for the people whose marriages or partnerships ultimately didn't succeed. So positive feedback, someone feeling valued, someone feeling cared for and cared about. And it raises interesting questions when we have a lot more people working from home and you don't have everyone coming to a central point anymore, where you're not having as many water fountain conversations or break rooms or things like that anymore. So how do you still have the continuity of purpose where you've got such diversity of people's working environments?
I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think about the leadership equation, especially that EQ component being impacted by virtual work,
right?
Even remote work.
Yeah.
Because that EQ component was always reinforced at work.
Yes.
And you're not seeing it that way. It's so easy for us to look at a screen, but you're not factoring in EQ when you're looking at a screen.
That's right.
Not like if someone in front of you.
That's right. And I don't think virtual meetings accomplish that. Some people turn the camera on, some people don't.
Yeah.
Some people, you got dogs barking in the background, you got any other number of variables that come into play, I think.
One word that defines great leadership.
I think privilege is the word for me. But with that comes responsibility. So are you an autocratic leader or are you a servant leader? All the people that I've had the highest respect for in my entire life, they've all operated as a servant leader. People would follow them off a cliff because of what they felt from the example of that person in leadership.
Over your years of experience, even as a teacher, you've reported to individuals, you've had great mentors in your life. You give out advice all the time. Okay? You give out advice constantly in your practice. What's the best advice that David's received that he'd want this audience to know? Oh,
I can tell you who gave it to me as well. One of the most important mentors I ever had was Dr. John Edwards. And sadly, he passed away. But he told me over and again in the years that he was mentoring me that, David, if you pay attention, you'll learn something from everyone that you meet. In 30 plus years of operating, I never stopped thinking about that. You don't necessarily have the same affinity or like everyone the same, but I never stopped thinking about what is my responsibility as a therapist, and what is my opportunity to learn from every single person I encounter. And for me, it creates energy.
I wish I could go back to my younger self and give myself that advice. There was a point in time in my career where it was my younger self, 26, out in California, and I had a leader that I didn't have a lot of respect for. I didn't see the credibility and or the knowledge of that leader, and it still haunts me till today. That I chose not to listen to feedback because I shut that leader's credibility pipe off. He is one of those leaders that I still think back to and say, I actually learned a lot from him.
Yeah.
And so I'll never turn that off. No matter if there's a fondness or an appreciation, you could always learn something from everyone.
Yeah, we want to get away from the all or nothing type of thinking, for sure.
Most important question, what's your favorite book?
I tell you, from a business perspective, I have many favorite books, but from a business perspective, I thought the book Good to Great that Jim Collins wrote. I guess I'm supposed to say your book, right?
Yeah, I thought you would. I thought you would, but no, that's okay. I asked the question. I've read Good to Great.
I thought that was a phenomenal book. The truth of the matter is, Roger, in all honesty, I thought your book was also phenomenal in outlining the central points that you're trying to get people to be thinking about. I think there's practical and pragmatic examples. And, it's like people think they understand IQ and EQ and they're not hard concepts to understand in theory. But I think in your book, you systematically went through and showed how the application of those concepts in different situations really matters or not. And so from that perspective, I was surprised actually by that.
Well, thank you very much.
So
appreciate
not
it.
wanting to be too complimentary here, but no, it was really good. It was a absolutely worthwhile read.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I was kidding. It doesn't have to be my book. It's much appreciated that it is, but no, the Good to Great has been a very good book. I think the whole concept about whether it's a book or whether it's this podcast, the important thing is joining the conversation.
Yes, I think so too.
And putting it on the table and getting people to think. I often tell my teams, listen, I can't make you shorter. I can't make you taller, fatter, skinnier. But what I can do is try to get you to think differently.
Yeah.
And if we could expand the spaces and how we think, we open up our aperture to a lot more possibilities.
I like to challenge people to think that if they see their life evolving and developing in the best ways they can imagine, what are they going to focus on in order for that to happen? There's a lot of things we can't control. So obviously we need to start first and foremost with the things that we can control. And I think there's a way also that employees can respectfully but directly give feedback to leaders as well. Now, obviously there's got to be enough of an environment in that organization for that to be tolerated. But I love the idea of people taking personal responsibility. And do people have clarity around their own goals and their own purpose? What gives them purpose? And the other point that we have to be thinking about is what brings balance? Because I think you have to get out of the United States to understand the pressures of living in the United States.
Yeah.
To be honest with you.
Yeah, because you were born and raised in Australia?
In Australia.
And you came to the U.S. thinking it was only just going to be a year.
I thought I was coming for a year. It was I graduated and I'd been a high school teacher for a year, and I never took a gap year in college because I didn't have really any confidence I'd go back to college. And who knew that this would be my life? And I got the opportunity of back to school and graduate school. And I've, I'll always be a proud Australian, but I've loved the opportunity for my life in America.
We're glad you're here, and we're glad you came on board on this podcast, and you were my first guest. Now, the one thing I'm going to have to do here is I'm going to have to edit it with captioning because your accent may.
No,
just joking.
If I get back to Australia for 2 or 3 weeks, you'll actually hear
it's stronger.
Well, it's not just the accent; it's also the language. You start, instead of saying sidewalk, I'm now saying footpath, and I'm not going to the gas station. I'm going to the petrol station, and you're picking up the phrases that kind of as well, and then that kind of gives it a bit of a kick, I think.
Appreciate you coming on board and talking to the group. And as I said earlier, just a second ago, that everything in this whole journey and you've known me for quite a bit of time right now.
Yeah.
This whole journey is just about that conversation.
Yes.
It's about that conversation that says that as we think about ourselves as leaders, we need to challenge ourselves to think about how we're leading. This conversation doesn't need to end here, and it won't. We'll continue to have more episodes. I'd welcome this audience to participate in more ways than just waiting for these episodes to drop. As the episodes drop, you could join us on YouTube, subscribe, turn on your notifications. That'll inform you that an episode is dropped, and tune in. That's one way of staying engaged. Second way of staying engaged and continuing to develop your skills is pick up the book, The Integrated Leader. It's on Amazon. It's a quick read. It's 109 pages. It's not intended to be laborsome. It's supposed to be a guide. And so you could pick that up on Amazon and write to me in an email. Let me know what you thought of it. Drop me a note on LinkedIn, whatever you choose to. But to me, the value of this is all about the conversation that we're having.
Yeah. And Roger, I'm thrilled with the experience that you've had, in your corporate life and the success you've had. Think it's great that you're a person that's wanting to bring this focus to the business community in how do people increase their effectiveness? How do we just not settle for one-dimensional thinking based upon the pressures that we're living under or the goals that we have to meet? So, hats off to you for that.
Well, thank you very much. The thing I want to highlight is that I don't care what organization you're in, what industry you're in, there are two systems in place. And if you want to close that execution gap that you have between intellect and impact, then there's an equation at play. And that equation is IQ and EQ that help you optimize that. There's the capital system that is required. Results need to be achieved. We're not going to shortchange that one, okay? And we're not going to cheerlead or bubblegum and lollipop our way to the results. But the other system is that human system. That human system that says, what do I need from my leader to be able to give my discretionary effort to be able to grow, develop, and deliver? And as leaders, we need to be tuned into that more now than any time before, because technology is advancing at a quick pace. And there are different generations that are in the workforce that need different things. That situational leadership comes into play so much.
Just popped into my mind that the last time I was employed was in my 30s, where I had an employer, a company, and I was the director of psychiatric services for a hospital, an inpatient hospital unit. And I ended up being fired by the president of the hospital, who I reported to. He was a new leader, and he had just been promoted to being the president of the hospital. So I remember this competition between he and I understood the hierarchy. I reported to him, but I would say things to him like, he was a MBA, and ultimately I don't think he would have known an emotion if it not hit him in the head. And I would say to him, the psychiatric department was behind two big closed doors that obviously were locked for security reasons. And I said, it would really mean a lot to the staff to see you once in a while, to know that we're just not, behind the closed doors there like a forgotten organization. And he says, I'm here to tell you what I need from you, not for you to tell me what you need from me. I still remember it. And so in that moment, I should have had the clarity and the conviction to understand that this was never going to be successful for me, and I really have left. But I really sabotaged myself, and he fired me, and he really should have fired me, because I really, at that point, didn't care about his spreadsheets, and he really didn't care about the work we were doing. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately, it was not compatible, and who knew that I would just end up in the directions that I've been, which has been very fulfilling for me. So ultimately, that was a sort of a shocking day that turned out to be a really good thing, but I wouldn't have ever scripted it that way. Interestingly, as a footnote, many years after that, he actually contacted me back.
Really?
Yeah. And he just said, I want you to know how much he'd learned, because he'd been terminated. And he sent me a book that he'd gone out of his way to send. And so ultimately,
it wasn't The Integrated Leader, because that wasn't out
written.
then.
It wasn't in my 30s. That wasn't written, quite a long time ago. And I just thought about it as I was thinking about the conversation, because he was very high IQ and very equipped to do his job, and you're running a psychiatric department. We're very EQ trained as therapists, I think.
Right.
And it's just the incompatibility and the intolerance that just resulted in a lose-lose, I think.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Thank you, David. As leaders, what we're charged with doing is bringing that corporate or that company strategy to life. Right? That's what we need to do. We've all seen strategies that are ironclad, yet don't reach their full potential. And we've seen strategies that you wouldn't write home to your mom about, but they over-deliver. The key differentiation between those two outcomes is the leadership that we have and the torch that the leaders carry. But the teams that will optimize and deliver differentiated results are the teams that understand that there are two systems at play. There's that capital system with the IQ, and there's that human system with the EQ. And to be able to deliver that strategy and differentiate from all the other competition, okay, or avoid any of the disruptions that come into play, both those systems need to be put, in your word, into balance.
Yeah.
Okay, into balance. So if this is a conversation that you want to continue, I've given you the ways that you could continue with this conversation, and keep this in mind. The future of leadership is human, because it will require the human capability to lead both parts of this equation. I'm Roger Francis. Until next time, thank you very much. Talk soon.